International tourists are becoming hesitant to travel to the US as the Trump administration enforces an immigration crackdown. Reports of harsh treatment and even detentions by US border agents have alarmed Europeans. Germany, the UK, Denmark and Finland have all updated their travel advice for citizens visiting the US. So, will Europeans still want to go there? Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Now, there's been a drop in Europeans visiting the US as travellers are wary of Trump's stricter entry rules, including arrests and detentions, as US border forces tighten visa vetting procedures and a crackdown in undocumented migrants. Is Trump making the US globally unpopular?
More than 10 million Western Europeans holiday in the United States every year. But now some countries in Europe have updated their travel advice following reports of airport detentions involving tourists. The UK travel advice says you should comply with all entry, visa and other conditions of entry. The authorities in the US set and enforce entry rules strictly. You may be liable to arrest or detention if you break the rules. It comes after British woman Rebecca Burke was held for 19 days over concerns she had breached her visa conditions. Germany has also updated its travel advice for the US to emphasise that a visa or entry waiver does not guarantee entry for its citizens. German citizen Fabian Schmidt was held for 16 days after re-entering the US via Mexico, and German Jessica Busch was detained for 6 weeks. Such cases have risen since the US President Donald Trump announced immigration-related executive orders, strict border control and tighter visa procedures. It's resulted in a decline in Europeans travelling there. In March, there was a 17% drop in overall European travellers compared to the same period last year. UK saw a 5% decrease, while France dropped by 29% and Germany experienced a 15% decline. International arrivals to the US decreased by 11.6% in March, costing the US billions in revenue. In particular, flight bookings from Canada to the US have dropped by 70%, driven by Trump's trade war and his desire to make Canada America's 51st state. More than 20 million Canadians visited the US in 2024, generating billions of dollars and supporting American jobs. Despite the decline in the US's popularity amongst its closest allies in Europe, Trump appears determined to see through his border crackdown, but at what cost?
Well, let's meet our guests in Cleveland, in the United States. We have Richard Herman. He's an immigration lawyer and founder of Richard T. Herman Associates. That's a Cleveland-based immigration law firm. In Staffordshire, in England, we have Gilly Bachelor. She's an award-winning independent travel agent. And in London, we have Sean Tipton. He's a spokesperson for ABTA, which is a trade association for UK travel agents, tour operators, and the wider travel industry. You're all very welcome to Roundtable. Richard, we'll come to you first in the United States. What's going on? How worried should we be as traveling members of the public?
Well, Enda, I got to say, I've been an immigration lawyer for 30 years. And I've never seen this level of aggressiveness and hostility by U.S. immigration authorities. I mean, there is an authoritarian shift happening in the United States towards internationals and immigrants. And we're seeing it at the embassies, we're seeing it at the border, and we're seeing it on the interior of the United States. And the phrase that the Trump administration uses is extreme vetting. And extreme vetting means a much more aggressive, invasive inquiry process to determine who the other person is. Are they a risk to the United States? And, do they meet their qualifications for the visa category that they're entering the U.S. on? Airports now are not just a checkpoint. They're really a high stakes screening zone. And so I think for visitors, they definitely need to think about how they prepare for that encounter when they come into the United States.
Gilly, what have you been picking up from your customers in the last few weeks and months as people are planning summer holidays? What are they saying to you?
Well, the USA is a really popular destination and it's one of our top selling destinations. But there's no getting away from it. People are more concerned regarding the requirements for visas. Now, the vast majority of our clients would be travelling on ESTAs because they would have a British passport, they're British citizens, and they would meet the conditions of that, i.e. they're going on holiday and they're going for 90 days. As part of our process, we always check people's passports and we also check their ESTAs as well. I honestly don't think this is necessarily a new issue for travelling to the States or indeed anywhere. Having the correct documentation to travel, it has been key. I mean, we all learned, we learned the hard way during COVID, and the kind of legislation and requirements from that, we still, use those processes today. So when you book a trip, we check with the FCDO what the rules are, and we keep checking that right up to the day of departure.
Sean, to you, anytime I see travel advice updated for a country, it's generally not for a good reason. I mean, are you surprised by what you're seeing and hearing from the United States?
Well, Enda, I mean, the Foreign Office will always update travel advice, even if it's a fairly minor update, and they'll make that very clear that they've done so, which is obviously they'd be remiss if they didn't. So in terms of the USA, they haven't actually changed that much. All they've emphasized is the fact that if you are traveling to the US, you must make sure that you disclose exactly the right reason why you're going and that you do fulfill any potential requirements for entry into the country. I mean, if you look at the border force in America, they've always been pretty strict. I don't think that's changed at all. So that's all they've really said. It's not something that's new. It's just to re-emphasize how important that is, particularly when you're applying for your ESTA. And we've always recommended that when you get your ESTA, you should try, if you can, to get that before you actually book your holiday, because there can be reasons why you won't necessarily get one. I mean, the vast majority of people do go in for leisure purposes, but there will be reasons. For example, if you've had a speeding fine and you haven't paid it at the time you were due to do so, that's fairly minor in the UK. It's not in America. So little things like that could catch you out, which means you actually then physically have to go for an interview. Then you'll probably pass and go, but that can take quite some time. So I think they've always had fairly strict entry requirements in the sense that you must abide by precisely what you're being asked. And I don't think that's changed. That's all the Foreign Office has really done. They haven't said something like, oh, we're seeing major problems getting to the USA. That's not at all what they've said. Just to re-emphasize how important it is that you do follow the entry requirements when you're going to the USA. And I think that's a sensible thing to do.
Richard, to you, there will be people watching who perhaps overstayed a student visa or ran over a couple of weeks during their student days when they were visiting the United States. They will now be fully grown adults with children looking to book a family holiday. I mean, should they be worried about rocking up at an airport in New York or California?
I mean, absolutely. I mean, any type of prior immigration violation is now being strictly scrutinized. So, whether it's overstaying a visa or even, criminal cases, small criminal cases. I mean, the recent stories that we're hearing from the border are people being, people coming in on tourist visas, some of them being detained, sometimes for days or even a week or 2 weeks. I think in The Guardian, there was a great article recently published by a Canadian citizen who I think was detained for 12 days at the border. So yeah, I think the key thing is always make sure that you have your travel history and your visa and everything, or your ESTA, everything is compliant. And if you have any question before you travel, talk to an immigration lawyer before you get on the plane, because if you're detained at the border, you don't have the right to counsel to be with you. And sometimes they move people around and you can't, even contact your client easily when they're detained. So I think you want to address those issues before you get on a plane.
Thanks, Richard. Gilly, to you, do you think you will see an increase then perhaps in people wanting holidays in Canada or other destinations this year?
Right, just to go back to the States in terms of popularity, we had seen a slight decline in popularity for the States previously just because of inflation and the cost of travel. So that was already starting to hit us, and we were, starting to see big numbers or improving numbers for Canada. The thing is for us with Canada, around the Rockies, for example, if you're looking to do that in June, July, August, you're really going to struggle to get availability now. So I'm not really sure how much capacity Canada will have for those key dates. But, it's another incredible destination, but it's very different from the States. It's very different from visiting New York or Las Vegas, for example.
And Gilly, just to go back then, say the last 4 years under President Biden, I'm guessing your numbers were good, that a lot of people in the UK wanted to visit the US and they felt that there wouldn't be any issues with border security or getting in or, even, God forbid, being detained.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. It's a hugely popular destination. It's probably outside Europe, it's our second biggest seller, and then Canada would come a close second. A lot of people will do short trips to the States as well, to New York 4 or 5 days, and we don't tend to get those shorter trips for Canada. So that is kind of where the difference is. But we'd already hit issues with the USA with the issue of Cuba. Like, for example, people were getting caught out where they'd visited typically Cuba on a cruise, and then they'd gone on to apply for an ESTA, and then they realised that they, post 21, that they were no longer eligible for that and had to apply for full visas. So we've always been vigilant for changes in the US.
Sean, to you, just spell out for our viewers the issue around visas. A lot of people think you get a visa, that's you into a country. It's not necessarily the case, is it? It's the border agents have the final say.
I think if you've ever applied for an ESTA, and there's a very similar scheme going to Australia, and actually for people coming into the UK, we've introduced an ETA, which is a very similar thing, which will apply to anybody coming into the UK who's not a UK citizen. It's a pretty straightforward process, but I liken it to when you're taking out travel insurance. Have you got a pre-existing medical condition? You'll be asked a whole raft of questions, and you need to make sure you answer them accurately. So as long as you do that, and you get your ESTA through, I really don't think you need to worry. But if there is a potential problem, it will be spotted at that point, and then you will be refused your ESTA. And that physically means that you will then have to go do a face-to-face interview at the American Embassy. I think there's a couple of other locations around the UK, but seriously, it's quite a time-consuming process. So, and that's always been the case for travel to the USA. So it's very clear that when we say to people, it's a lovely place, you're going to have a great holiday, but make sure that you get your ESTA first to make sure there aren't any potential problems if you then do have to go and get a visa. And as you quite rightly implied there, and there's no guarantee that you will get a visa. There are certain people who will just be refused point blank. They're very much a minority. But for people, and that's the vast majority of my customers, who are going on holiday to places like Florida and New York, which account for probably 2/3 of our trips to the US, I don't think they really need to worry unduly about this. Just make sure you apply for your ESTA in time, make sure you answer all the questions truthfully, and I really don't see there being any problems. But I would stress, though, that, again, the people who man the border control points in the US, they don't have a great sense of humour. So just be very straight-faced when they ask you a question, answer it truthfully, and I don't think this is going to be a problem. You're quite right. There have been high-profile cases of people who are being treated, well, I think it's fair to say, pretty harshly, but they are very much the minority, and we would have sent tens of thousands of customers to the USA since President Trump's election, and I haven't heard back from my members saying that any of them have had problems.
Richard, to you, is this coming from the top down then, clearly?
Well, absolutely. I mean, Trump has initiated, an aggressive immigration enforcement agenda in the United States, initially focused on arresting and deporting undocumented immigrants. But now it's morphing into other aspects, I think, and partly driven by the fact that he's doesn't have the funds to support his aggressive deportation initiative. So he's looking for high-profile targets that will get a lot of media exposure to kind of prop him up as strong in enforcement. So that's why you're seeing a lot of arrests and detaining of green card holders in the U.S., who the government believes is engaging in, activities that the government thinks is against U.S. foreign policy interests. For example, pro-Palestinian causes. So I do think that this is coming from the White House. And in terms of the border, we've not seen the border this hostile in the past. And I'll give you some examples of things to watch out for. And I think that your guest is right, that tourists generally don't have to worry that much. They should definitely be able to answer the questions quickly and honestly at the border. Where are they going? Who are they coming to visit? Do they have the funds to support their trip? Those kind of things. But I do see, and this is true over the years, but increasing now, visitors that are being profiled as someone likely to engage in unauthorized work in the United States. So if the individual fits a profile, might be young, single, coming to the United States on ESTA, and they're coming in quite frequently, if their travel pattern indicates that something that might be a red flag, then the border might put them in a secondary inspection and say, hey, let's go through your phone. And some of those high-profile cases were focused on people that were coming here on tourist status, but the border thought they were coming here to work illegally. And that's another thing to worry about in terms of the invasiveness of the border encounters. Your phones, your laptops, all your electronic devices are subject to cursory review and also deep review using forensic technology and they can keep your data, by the way, for 15 years. So the bottom line is, yes, there's 72 million visitors come to the United States every year. They pump in $100 billion a year into the U.S. economy, 50 billion from international students alone. But there's a new sheriff in town, and it looks like Trump's going to make it difficult.
We've certainly got that message, Richard, about the new sheriff in town. We've heard that before on Roundtable. Gilly, to you, just give us an impression of how much the average UK family would spend then on a holiday to the United States in the summer. Say 2 weeks, California, family of 4. What kind of money are they dropping into the American economy?
Flights are more expensive than ever. So let's say they're doing an economy flight, they're a family of 4. If they were doing something like Disney, I would have said, £20,000 quite easy. It's an enormous amount of money. And of course, they're spending a lot of money when they're there as well. So as I said before, it's not, you can get good value in the States, but it's an expensive destination for sure. And that is increasingly so with the cost of hotels and eating out as well. But yeah, I think during that time, £20,000 for a family of 4 wouldn't be unusual.
So, Gilly, can you see your customers maybe saying to you this year, we're going to do Europe instead, we're going to stay closer to home?
Yeah, but I don't think that's anything to do with these ESTA requirements. I think that's to do with the sheer cost of going to the States. I think people are finding it extremely expensive when they're over there. I mean, the growth in all-inclusive holidays, we're seeing across the industry because people can budget and set it. Now, the States is never going to be that. It's going to be a tour, or it's going to be Disney, or it's going to be a city break, which has a lot of, fees and charges, like resort fees. Hotels are growing in costs. And other, eating out and tips as well. People are just finding it very expensive. And that's the feedback that we're getting from people who've been going for decades.
Sean, does that cost of living and everything getting more expensive this year, how are you feeling at ABTA about that?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly is having an impact, and understandably, I mean, obviously we're now talking about increasing utility bills about to hit families. And it's not actually a good look, really, is it? But having said that, what we are told repeatedly by customers is that the last thing they want to cut back on are their holidays, particularly when times are tough. And that makes sense, doesn't it, really? Because if you, let's say, you had your, particularly, let's talk about America. I was in an interview yesterday where I was being asked to have people been cancelling their trips to America. And I said, well, put it this way. If you had been telling your children they were going to go to Florida and they started to look forward for months on end, you're not going to cancel the trip because of Donald Trump or whatever you feel of him. So I think, and in that sense, a lot of these holidays to America would have been booked weeks, if not months ago, and they'll be going ahead. But Julie's quite right. it's no longer, it's quite an expensive destination. So it tends to be something that people might do once every 10 years rather than every year. And moving forward, with pressure on family budgets in particular, they are really looking for good value destinations, and Europe is much closer to home. And as he said, all-inclusives in particular are very, very popular, and they're really not an option in the UK. In parts of the Caribbean, yes, but sorry, in the USA rather, but not in the USA. So, yeah, moving forward, I think, that's quite right. That's probably more of an issue, just people's finances. Can they afford to go?
Sean, I've seen the figure of a 10% decline since President Trump came in travel from the UK to the US. Is that fair?
It's a bit too early to say. That actually relates to the last time he was elected. And then there was a very distinct correlation between him being elected and the fall in business. Haven't heard that so much this time round, but I think that's, again, partly because a lot of people would have booked already. And we're certainly seeing that post the pandemic. People tend to be booking early, particularly families. And once they book, they're not going to cancel. They'll just go ahead with the trip and they're already budgeted for it. So, but I think definitely, it's going to put some people off. It's not just about, whether they feel they're going to have problems getting through security when they arrive in the US, or because obviously that's not a good look. It's as much about, do they approve of what's going on? And clearly not everybody does. But clearly the biggest loser in terms of the American tourist industry are Canadians, and they're staying away in very large numbers. And as I understand it, they're the largest single market. So if I was running an American hotel or theme park, etc., whatever it happens to be, relying on tourists, I'd be pretty concerned about what's going on at the moment.
Thanks, Sean. Richard, to you on that point, talking of Canada, I noticed a major European airline last week launched a sale of flights to the USA, and I had to delve into the comments, and the comments were overwhelmingly people in the UK saying, we're not going there for 4 years. When are you putting Canadian flights on sale? Are you worried that a lot of people are going to go visit your neighbours instead because they might be made a bit more welcome?
I think that's true. I mean, this is the great unwelcoming period in U.S. history. And we're sending a message to the world, not just tourists, but internationals that are coming here to work or invest. We're not going to be easy to deal with. I mean, our aggressiveness towards Canada and Greenland is embarrassing. I had dinner with some friends the other night, and my friend turned to me and said, I'm embarrassed to be an American. My house actually is on Lake Erie, on the edge of Lake Erie, and on a good day, I might be able to see Canada. I don't refer to that country as the 51st state, for sure.
Gilly, there's still a deep relationship between the UK and lots of other countries in Europe and America. We see their films, their TV series, their books, their actors, their culture spreads everywhere. People will always want to go to the US, won't they?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that when it comes to trips, a lot of people are prepared to put politics aside. So I'm not seeing a softening in demand for it for political reasons. I've heard people say things, but I'm thinking they're not the people who would be booking to go to the States right now anyway. And it's such a diverse country. We do a lot of road trips from city breaks, but also we do a lot of cruise out of the States, which you just can't do out of Canada. So there's a lot of product that cannot be replicated. Yeah, it's hugely popular, and I do not see that changing. I just think that people have got to be, more on the ball, with their documentation. And one thing we are seeing the rise of is what's called bleisure, this sort of trend, the combo between a leisure trip and a business trip. And I think those are the people who've got to be particularly careful, when they're applying for ESTAs or visas. But the general public who are doing a family trip, as long as you are answering the questions truthfully, you've got minimal issues.
So, Sean, just to summarise, I think what we've learned here today, President Trump is not going to change. If you are travelling to the United States, P's and Q's, cross the T's, dot the I's, and obey the rules.
Exactly, 100% right. And when you fill in your ESTA form online, answer it incredibly truthfully. I'm not saying people would lie, but if they even ask a question you might think is a bit silly, answer it truthfully. And if you do that, it's very unlikely that you won't get your ESTA through, which means when you arrive in the USA, it's incredibly unlikely you're going to have any problems. And I would say actually moving forward, if we are going to see a big drop in demand, not necessarily from the UK, but from worldwide, that's going to have an impact on prices. So that's later on in the year, it could be thinking, actually, there's some really good bargains to be had there.
Very interesting point, Sean. Final point to you, Richard, just briefly. We get it that the administration, you've described them as the great unwelcoming of the United States. But the American people, you guys, anytime I've been there, friendly, welcoming, chatty. Where are you from? Oh, I'm Irish. I get that all the time, obviously. But, you know, you're still a very friendly group of people to go visit and hang out with.
I agree with you, and we're going to remain so. I mean, one reason I'm very optimistic is that, you know, I study U.S. immigration history, and if you look back in the annals of you know, congressional records, and you know, this unwelcoming, this anti-immigrant or anti-international fervor is actually very American. It happens every 50 or 60 years. If you look in the 1900s in the congressional record, you see these stalwarts coming forward in Congress testifying against these immigrants. They're bringing crime and they're bringing disease and they're ruining America. And who were they talking about? They were talking about the Poles, the Irish, the Germans, the Jews, America's greatest generation in World War II. So I'm optimistic that this will be a blip on the screen of history.
We wish you well, Richard. Thanks for your time today. Gilly and Sean as well. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Just search for Roundtable, TRT World. But for me, from Enda Brady and all of the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.